Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling confused, slightly guilty, like you somehow lost, even though nothing obvious happened? You didn't lose the argument. You lost the language to explain what just happened. Because manipulation doesn't usually start with insults or aggression. It starts with words you don't fully control. And today, I want to show you why having a larger vocabulary doesn't make you sound smarter. It makes you harder to manipulate. Manipulators don't win because they're more intelligent than you. They win because they can name things faster than you can. When they have words and you only have feelings, they control the frame, or what the conversation is really about. And when you can't clearly name what's happening, you're far more likely to doubt yourself instead. That's not a personality flaw. That's a language gap, and it shows up the moment you can't explain why something feels wrong. And once you see that gap, you start noticing something else. Here's something most people miss. Manipulation thrives when things stay vague. If you can't describe what just happened, you can't challenge it. Instead, you're left with thoughts like, something felt off. Maybe I misunderstood, or I don't want to overreact. And that hesitation is exactly where control sneaks in. But there's an even more specific moment where this happens, and most people miss it entirely. There's a moment manipulation relies on more than any other. It's the moment when you feel something shift, but you don't have the words to explain it. You feel pressured, but not threatened, dismissed, but not openly insulted, cornered, but without a clear accusation. And because you can't name it, you start correcting yourself instead. You soften your tone. You explain yourself again. You give them the benefit of the doubt. That's not kindness. That's not having the words to protect yourself. And this is precisely why certain words are used so often in the way we talk publicly, in the media, online, and in politics. These words don't just describe what's happening. They shape how those events are understood and whether they're questioned at all. You see this constantly in news coverage, in political language. Words like unprecedented. It sounds serious, but it often replaces clear details. Unprecedented compared to what? By whose standard? When words sound authoritative but remain vague, they don't inform you, they guide you. Or how about insidious? A powerful emotional word that implies hidden danger without ever having to prove intent or evidence. You'll hear laudable used to preempt criticism. If something is already framed as morally good, questioning it suddenly makes you look unreasonable. Or idiosyncrasy, a clever way to downplay concerning behavior by reframing it as just a harmless quirk. And words like ingratiate, which suggest manipulation without ever naming a concrete action. None of these words are bad, but when you don't understand how they function, they quietly steer your interpretation without your consent. And once you start noticing that, something else becomes impossible to ignore. Pay attention to how often language replaces explanation. Experts say, well, which experts? Critics argue, which critics? This raises concerns. About what exactly? When language gestures instead of clarifies, it's not informing you, it's steering you. A trained vocabulary doesn't settle for vague language. It asks for structure. And that shift from receiving language to examining it changes everything. Here's the turning point most people never experience. The moment you can say, that's deflection, that's minimization, that's emotional framing. The emotional fog lifts. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, what tactic is being used here? And here's why that matters more than people realize. Check out how different these two internal responses feel. I don't know why that bothered me, versus that turned my concern into an emotional issue instead of addressing the facts. Same situation, completely different level of control. One leaves you unsettled, the other gives you footing. This is why vocabulary matters, not for speaking, but for thinking. And I've seen this pattern play out repeatedly in classrooms, workplaces, and in the way we talk publicly in the media and online. The people who struggle most aren't the least intelligent. They're the ones who were never given the language to name what's happening. And once that language appears, the balance of the conversation starts to shift. manipulators don't fear confrontation. They fear clarity, because clarity removes plausible deniability. It removes emotional leverage. It removes narrative control. When you can precisely name what's happening, they can no longer hide behind ambiguity. And suddenly, the conversation feels very different, because now they feel exposed. Look, this isn't about memorizing fancy vocabulary or trying to sound impressive. That helps. It's about learning categories of language, how words are used to shift responsibility, emotion, and control. Words that blur responsibility, words that soften blame, words that apply moral pressure, words that shut down questions without answering them. When you understand how words function, not just what they mean, you stop being emotionally reactive and start being mentally anchored. A large vocabulary doesn't make you superior. It helps you protect yourself without turning the conversation into a fight. Because when you can name what's happening, you can choose how or whether to engage. And that's what this channel is about, giving you the language most people were never taught, so you can think clearly, speak confidently, and stop being controlled by conversations you didn't even realize were rigged. If this video resonated with you, check out this next video where I break down specific manipulation tactics and the exact words used to disguise them. Thanks for watching. I'll see you online soon.